Montana Territory, 1887. The crisp autumn air carried a hint of winter's promise as Juliette Keller stood at the edge of the Bridger Mountains, gazing down at the sprawling ranch in the valley below. The young widow clutched her weathered carpetbag with trembling fingers, the gold band on her left hand catching the late afternoon sunlight. At 22, she never imagined she would be starting over again, especially not in a place where the mountains touched the sky and the land stretched endlessly before her like a canvas awaiting its first stroke of paint. "This is it," she whispered to herself. The Valley B Ranch. The advertisement had been simple enough. Cook needed. Good wages. Inquire at Valley B Ranch, Montana Territory. What the advertisement hadn't mentioned was that the ranch owner, Vaughn Barrington, was barely 25, unexpectedly widowed himself, and father to a 4-year-old girl who hadn't spoken more than a handful of words since her mother's passing 6 months prior. Juliette adjusted her modest navy blue traveling dress, smoothed her chestnut hair back into its practical bun, and started down the path toward what she hoped would be a new beginning. The death of her husband Thomas in a mining accident had left her with nothing but debts and memories. She needed this position desperately. As she approached the main house, an impressive 2-story structure of locally quarried stone and timber, Juliette noticed a man standing on the wide front porch. Even from a distance, she could tell he was tall and broad-shouldered, his stance that of someone used to commanding respect. His dark blonde hair caught the sunlight as he turned in her direction. "Hello there," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Can I help you?" Juliette straightened her spine and lifted her chin. "Mr. Barrington? I'm Juliette Keller. I've come about the cooking position." The young rancher descended the porch steps, and Juliette found herself looking into eyes the color of a summer sky. His face was handsome despite the weariness etched around those eyes, his jaw strong and clean-shaven. He couldn't be much older than she was, yet responsibility had clearly marked him. "Mrs. Keller," he said, extending his hand. "You're not what I expected." "Oh." She slipped her gloved hand into his. "And what did you expect, Mr. Barrington?" A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "Someone older, I suppose. You've experienced cooking for a large household." "I cooked for my husband's boarding house in Denver for 3 years," she replied. 15 miners with hearty appetites. I doubt your ranch hands could eat more than they did." Vaughn studied her for a moment before nodding. "We're 12 hands during the winter months, more come spring. Can you start tomorrow?" Juliette blinked in surprise. "Just like that? No references checked? No trial meal? Mrs. Patterson in town vouched for you. Said your husband was a good man." His eyes softened slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss." "As I am for yours," she replied quietly. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared grief, before Vaughn cleared his throat and gestured toward the house. "Let me show you to your quarters. You'll have the room off the kitchen. It's small but private." He hesitated. "There's one more thing you should know. My daughter, Emma, she doesn't speak much since her mother passed. Don't take it personally." Juliette nodded. "Children grieve differently than adults, Mr. Barrington. Sometimes silence feels safer than words." He gave her an appraising look, as if seeing something in her he hadn't noticed before. "Indeed, Mrs. Keller. Indeed." As they approached the house, the front door creaked open, and a small figure appeared. The little girl had her father's blonde hair, tied in 2 neat braids, and wore a simple blue pinafore over a white dress. She regarded Juliette with solemn eyes. "Emma," Vaughn said gently, "this is Mrs. Keller. She's going to be our new cook." The child's gaze remained fixed on Juliette, assessing her with a wisdom beyond her years. Juliette knelt down to meet her at eye level. "Hello, Emma. It's very nice to meet you," she said softly. "I make very good apple dumplings. Perhaps we could make some together sometime." Emma's expression didn't change, but she didn't retreat either, which Vaughn seemed to take as a positive sign. He placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Mrs. Keller needs to get settled in. Why don't you go find Mrs. Finch while I show her around?" Emma nodded once before disappearing back inside, leaving Juliette wondering what thoughts were hidden behind those serious eyes. The tour was brief. Kitchen, pantry, dining room, sitting room, and her small but clean bedroom with a narrow window overlooking the vegetable garden. The house was well-built and comfortable, if somewhat Spartan in its furnishings. It spoke of a man who valued function over ornament, though touches of a woman's hand remained in the curtains and quilts. Mrs. Finch has been helping with Emma and the housekeeping, Vaughn explained as they returned to the kitchen. She's getting on in years and lives in town. Can't manage the cooking for all the hands anymore. I understand, Juliette said, already assessing the well-appointed kitchen with its large cast-iron stove and ample work surfaces. Breakfast at dawn, I presume? 5 o'clock sharp, Vaughn confirmed. Lunch at noon, dinner at 6. The men like hearty meals, especially in winter. And what about you and Emma? Do you eat with the hands, or separately? Something flickered in his eyes. We've been eating with them lately. It's easier that way. Easier than sitting at a table with an empty chair, Juliette thought, but didn't say. She knew that particular pain all too well. I'll have breakfast ready at 5, she assured him. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should unpack and familiarize myself with the pantry. Vaughn nodded and turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. Mrs. Keller, thank you for coming all this way. This ranch needs. He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. We need a good cook. After he left, Juliette stood alone in the kitchen, wondering what he had been about to say. This ranch needs what? A woman's touch? Some semblance of normalcy? She shook her head and began the task of making this kitchen her own, trying to ignore the curious flutter in her chest whenever she thought of those blue eyes and the sadness they carried. That night, after preparing herself for bed in her small room, Juliette heard a soft knock at her door. Opening it, she found Emma standing there in a white nightgown, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. Emma, is everything all right? Juliette asked, kneeling down. The little girl didn't speak but extended her hand, holding a small, worn book of children's stories. She looked up at Juliette expectantly. Would you like me to read to you? Juliette asked gently. Emma nodded, and without a word, took Juliette's hand and led her toward the staircase. They passed Vaughn's study, where the door stood ajar, revealing him bent over account books at his desk. He looked up, surprise evident on his face. Emma, what are you doing out of bed? His gaze moved to their joined hands, then to the book. Before Juliette could explain, Emma tugged at her hand and pointed upstairs. I believe she'd like me to read her a story, Juliette said uncertainly. If that's all right with you, Mr. Barrington. Vaughn stared at them for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Of course, he finally said, his voice rough. Her room is the second door on the right. Emma's room was simple but lovely, with a small brass bed covered in a colorful patchwork quilt. A rocking horse stood in one corner, and a shelf held a modest collection of toys and books. Juliette sat on the edge of the bed as Emma climbed in and pulled the covers up to her chin. Which story would you like to hear? Juliette asked, opening the book. Emma turned the pages until she came to The Ugly Duckling, then looked up at Juliette expectantly. As Juliette read, she noticed Emma's eyelids growing heavy. By the end of the story, the child was nearly asleep. Setting the book aside, Juliette gently tucked the blankets more securely around her. Good night, Emma, she whispered, rising to leave. A tiny voice stopped her. Can you tuck me in tomorrow too? Juliette turned back, stunned to hear the child speak. Emma's eyes were still heavy with sleep, but there was a fragile hope in them that pierced Juliette's heart. If your father says it's all right, I would be honored to, she replied softly. Emma nodded and closed her eyes, seemingly satisfied with this answer. As Juliette quietly closed the bedroom door, she found Vaughn standing in the hallway, his expression a mixture of astonishment and something that might have been hope. She spoke to you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Juliette nodded. Just one sentence. That's more than she said to anyone in months. He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. What did she say? She asked if I could tuck her in tomorrow too. Vaughn's eyes glistened in the dim light of the hallway. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, clearly overwhelmed by emotion. Mr. Barrington, Juliette began hesitantly, I don't wish to overstep my boundaries. I was hired as a cook, not a— Please, he interrupted. If Emma is comfortable with you, I would be grateful if you would continue. It's the first sign she's shown of wanting anything since her mother died. The raw pain in his voice made Juliette's throat tighten. Of course, she said softly. Good night, Mr. Barrington. As she returned to her room, Juliette wondered what she had gotten herself into. She had come to Valley B Ranch seeking employment, a way to support herself after losing everything. She hadn't expected to find a child in need, or a young father struggling to hold his world together. And she certainly hadn't expected the strange, warm feeling that had bloomed in her chest when Vaughn Barrington had looked at her with gratitude in those sky-blue eyes. Morning came early at Valley B Ranch. Juliette was up well before dawn, stoking the kitchen fire and preparing a hearty breakfast of flapjacks, eggs, bacon, and biscuits with gravy. By the time the ranch hands began filing in at 5 o'clock, the kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of fresh coffee and good food. The men, a mix of weathered veterans and younger cowboys, regarded her with curious but respectful nods as she directed them to the long table in the dining room. Vaughn entered last, Emma's small hand in his. The little girl's eyes lit up when she saw Juliette, though she remained silent. "Good morning, Mr. Barrington, Emma," Juliette greeted them. "I've set places for you at the small table by the window, if you prefer." Vaughn hesitated, glancing at the ranch hands already digging into their breakfast, then at the more intimate setting Juliette had arranged. "Thank you, Mrs. Keller. That would be nice." As she served them, Juliette noticed how Vaughn watched his daughter, alert to her every move, her every expression. His devotion was evident, as was his uncertainty. When Emma only picked at her food, concern crossed his features. "Try a bite of the flapjacks, sweetheart," he encouraged gently. Mrs. Keller made them special. Emma looked up at Juliette, then back at her plate. Deliberately, she took a small bite, then another. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "They're good, aren't they?" Vaughn said, relief evident in his voice. Emma nodded. Then, to both adults' surprise, she spoke again. "May I have syrup, please?" Juliette quickly brought the syrup pitcher, trying not to make too much of the moment lest she frighten the child back into silence. "Here you are, Emma. Would you like me to pour it for you?" Emma shook her head and carefully poured the syrup herself. "Thank you," she said softly. Vaughn's eyes met Juliette's over his daughter's head, gratitude and wonder plain in his expression. Something unspoken passed between them, a shared joy in this small victory, this tiny step forward for the grieving child. The moment was broken by the ranch foreman, Victor Thompson, approaching their table. "Boss, we're heading out to the north pasture today. Need to move those cattle before the weather turns." Vaughn nodded, instantly shifting back to his role as rancher. "I'll join you after I check the accounts. Make sure the men take extra supplies. That storm front's moving in faster than we thought." After breakfast, as Juliette cleared the dishes, she found herself humming softly, something she hadn't done since Thomas died. The kitchen work was familiar and comforting, giving her hands purpose while her mind wandered. She wondered about Vaughn's late wife, about what had happened, about the circumstances that had left both him and Emma so wounded. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Emma enter the kitchen until the child spoke. "My mama used to sing that song." Juliette turned, surprised. Emma stood in the doorway, still holding her empty plate. "Did she?" Juliette smiled, taking the plate. "It's called Beautiful Dreamer. My mother sang it to me when I was about your age." Emma considered this information. "My mama's in heaven now," she stated matter-of-factly. "Papa says she's an angel watching over me." "I'm sure she is," Juliette said gently, kneeling down to Emma's level. "My husband is in heaven too. Sometimes I think he sends me little signs to let me know he's watching over me." "What kind of signs?" Emma asked, curiosity brightening her eyes. "Well, sometimes I see a particular kind of butterfly that he used to point out to me. Or the sun breaks through the clouds in just the right way." Juliette smiled softly. "Little things that make me think of him and feel less alone." Emma nodded solemnly. "I saw a rainbow after Mama went to heaven. Papa said it was her saying hello." "Your papa sounds very wise," Juliette said, her heart aching for both the child and the young father trying so hard to guide her through grief. Emma hesitated, then asked, "Will you still tuck me in tonight?" "If your father says it's all right, of course I will," Juliette promised. The little girl nodded, apparently satisfied, and left the kitchen as quietly as she had entered. Juliette remained kneeling for a moment, overwhelmed by the trust this small, wounded child was placing in her, and by her own desire to be worthy of that trust. What she didn't realize was that Vaughn had paused outside the kitchen door, overhearing their conversation. By the time she rose and turned back to the sink, he had continued on his way, but not before a dangerous spark of hope had been kindled in his heart. The days fell into a pattern. Juliette rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent the mornings baking bread and planning meals, cooked a hearty midday dinner for the ranch hands, and then prepared a more modest supper for the evening. Each night, without fail, Emma would appear at her door with a book, and together they would go upstairs where Juliette would read until the child fell asleep. Vaughn never intruded on these moments, but sometimes Juliette would find him waiting in the hallway afterward, his expression a mixture of gratitude and something more complex that she couldn't, or perhaps wouldn't, name. "She's speaking more each day," he told Juliette one evening in late November, as they stood in the dim hallway outside Emma's room. "Not just to you, but to me as well. It's like she's coming back to life." "Children are resilient," Juliette said softly. "Sometimes they just need to know it's safe to be happy again." Vaughn studied her face in the lamplight. "You understand her in a way I haven't been able to. I've been so lost since Caroline died." "You're doing wonderfully with her," Juliette assured him. "She adores you." "I've been surviving, not living," he admitted, running a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his vulnerability. "For Emma's sake, I've tried to keep going, but until you came," he stopped abruptly, as if realizing he might be saying too much. Juliette felt her heart quicken, aware they were venturing into territory beyond employer and employee. "I should check on the bread dough," she said, stepping back. "Good night, Mr. Barrington." "Vaughn," he corrected softly. "Please, call me Vaughn." Juliette nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and hurried down the stairs. In the safety of the kitchen, she pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart racing beneath her fingers. She had come here seeking employment, nothing more. She couldn't afford to develop feelings for her employer, a man still mourning his wife, a man with a vulnerable daughter who was just beginning to heal, a man who, despite everything, was beginning to occupy far too many of her thoughts. The first significant snowfall came in early December, blanketing the valley in pristine white. Juliette woke to find the world transformed, the mountains rising like frosted sentinels against a pale blue sky. As she prepared breakfast, Emma burst into the kitchen, more animated than Juliette had ever seen her. "Mrs. Keller, it snowed. Papa says we can build a snowman after breakfast." Juliette smiled at the child's enthusiasm. "That sounds wonderful, Emma. Would you like to help me set the table before the men come in?" Emma nodded eagerly, carefully carrying plates to the dining room. When Vaughn entered a few minutes later, stamping snow from his boots, his face was flushed from the cold, his eyes bright. He looked younger somehow, less burdened. "Quite a storm we had last night," he said, accepting the cup of coffee Juliette offered. "The hands are digging out the barns now. I promised Emma a snowman once they've cleared a path." "She told me," Juliette replied with a smile. "It's good to see her excited." Vaughn's expression softened as he watched his daughter arranging napkins with careful precision. "It is," he agreed quietly. "I'd almost forgotten what her laugh sounds like." After breakfast, true to his word, Vaughn took Emma outside to build a snowman. From the kitchen window, Juliette could see them rolling increasingly large balls of snow across the yard. Emma's delighted squeals carried through the glass, punctuated by Vaughn's deeper laughter. Without thinking, Juliette grabbed her shawl and stepped onto the back porch for a better view. The domestic scene before her brought an unexpected pang of longing. This was what she and Thomas had dreamed of, a home, children, simple joys shared together. Dreams cut short by a mine collapse and a coffin lowered into rocky Colorado soil. "Mrs. Keller," Emma called, spotting her. "Come help us." Before Juliette could politely decline, Vaughn looked up, his smile warm and inviting. "Yes, come join us, Juliette. The more hands, the better." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something in the way he said it made her cheeks warm despite the cold air. Against her better judgment, she pulled her shawl tighter and stepped into the snow. For the next hour, they worked together on an impressive snowman, complete with a carrot nose, coal eyes, and an old ranch hat Vaughn contributed. When Emma declared they needed sticks for arms, Vaughn lifted her onto his shoulders to reach the lower branches of a nearby pine tree. "Be careful," Juliette called instinctively, then felt foolish for overstepping. But Vaughn just smiled at her, one hand securely holding Emma's leg. "Don't worry. I've got her." There was something in his tone, a gentle reassurance that extended beyond the current situation, that made Juliette's breath catch. When their creation was complete, they stood back to admire their handiwork, Emma between them, holding both their hands. "He needs a family," Emma announced, looking up at the snowman. "Every person needs a family." The innocent observation hung in the crisp air, laden with unspoken meaning. Vaughn's eyes met Juliette's over Emma's head, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "You're right, sweetheart," Vaughn finally said, his voice slightly rough. "Everyone does need a family." That evening, after tucking Emma in, Juliette found Vaughn in his study, staring into the fire. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat on the desk beside him. "She fell asleep quickly tonight," Juliette said softly, lingering in the doorway. The fresh air and excitement tired her out. Vaughn looked up, the firelight casting shadows across his handsome features. "Would you join me for a moment?" he asked, gesturing to the chair opposite his. Hesitantly, Juliette entered and sat down, smoothing her skirts nervously. This was the first time they had been alone together in such an intimate setting, and she was acutely aware of the impropriety, yet unable to refuse. "I wanted to thank you," Vaughn began, setting aside his glass. "Not just for today, but for everything since you arrived. She's coming back to herself. And I find that I am too." "I'm glad," Juliette said sincerely. "Emma is a wonderful child, and you're a good father." Vaughn shook his head slightly. "I've been lost, Juliette. When Caroline died in childbirth last spring, it was like the light went out of the world. Emma lost her stepmother, the only mother she'd ever known, and I lost my way." "Stepmother?" Juliette couldn't help her surprise. "Yes, Emma's birth mother died when she was just a few days old," Vaughn explained, his voice low. "Caroline and I married when Emma was 2. She was everything to us both." "I'm so sorry," Juliette whispered, understanding now the depth of their loss. Vaughn leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "The baby died too. A son." His voice broke slightly on the word. "For months, I've been going through the motions, trying to hold things together for Emma's sake, for the ranch. But inside," he pressed a fist against his chest. "Inside, everything was just empty." Juliette fought the urge to reach out to him, to offer comfort through touch. Instead, she said softly, "I understand that emptiness. After Thomas died, I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped away everything that made me who I was." "Yes," Vaughn agreed, looking up at her with recognition in his eyes. "That's exactly it. But lately I've started to feel again, to want things again, to imagine a future that isn't just enduring each day." The intensity of his gaze made Juliette's heart race. She knew she should leave, should maintain the proper distance between employer and employee, but something held her in place. The same something that had been growing between them since that first day, fragile as a new seedling pushing through snow. "It's getting late," she finally said, rising. "I should retire." Vaughn stood as well, towering over her in the firelit room. "Of course. I apologize for keeping you." "There's no need to apologize," Juliette assured him. "Good night, Vaughn." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Juliette, would you call me Vaughn more often? When it's just us?" She glanced back, finding vulnerability in his expression that matched the feeling in her own chest. "I will," she promised softly, before slipping away into the darkened hallway. In her small room off the kitchen, Juliette sat on the edge of her bed, trembling slightly. She was walking a dangerous line. Vaughn Barrington was her employer, a man still grieving his wife, a man with responsibilities to his daughter and his ranch. Whatever feelings might be growing between them were complicated by their circumstances and by the ghosts they both carried. Yet as she prepared for bed, Juliette couldn't deny that for the first time since Thomas died, she was thinking about tomorrow with something other than resignation. She was thinking about it with hope. December brought more snow and the preparations for Christmas. Juliette found herself swept up in the ranch's holiday traditions, baking special treats, helping Emma make paper decorations for the tree Vaughn and the hands brought in from the forest, and preparing for the Christmas Eve gathering where the neighboring ranchers would join them for dinner and dancing. "Papa says you'll make the best Christmas dinner ever," Emma told her one afternoon as they cut out paper snowflakes at the kitchen table. "Did he now?" Juliette smiled, carefully folding another piece of paper. "And what does Emma think I should make for this dinner?" "Apple dumplings," the child replied promptly. "And turkey. And cranberry sauce. And, my goodness," Juliette laughed. "You've given this some thought." Emma nodded seriously. "Last Christmas was sad. Mama was going to have the baby soon, and she was too tired for a party. This Christmas will be better because you're here. The simple statement, delivered with a child's innocent certainty, brought a lump to Juliette's throat. I'll do my best to make it special, she promised. Later that day, as Juliette kneaded bread dough, Vaughn entered the kitchen, bringing a gust of cold air with him. His cheeks were ruddy from the cold, his eyes bright. Something smells wonderful in here, he said, unwinding his scarf. Just the daily bread, Juliette replied, continuing to work the dough with practiced hands. Emma tells me you're expecting a feast for Christmas Eve. Vaughn chuckled, moving closer to warm his hands by the stove. That child has a sweet tooth that rivals any I've ever seen. But yes, we traditionally host the neighboring ranches for Christmas Eve. It was Caroline's favorite holiday. Juliette nodded, understanding the bittersweet nature of continuing traditions after loss. It will be Emma's first Christmas without her. We should make it special for her sake. Vaughn repeated softly. You've become a part of our lives so quickly, Juliette. Sometimes it feels as though you've always been here. She looked up, finding him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Flour dusted her hands and apron, and a loose strand of hair had fallen across her forehead. She must look a sight, yet the way Vaughn gazed at her made her feel beautiful. I'm just the cook, she reminded him gently, turning back to her dough. No, he said, stepping closer. You're far more than that. To Emma. And to me. Before Juliette could respond, the back door burst open again as several ranch hands entered, laughing and stomping snow from their boots. The moment between them shattered, Vaughn stepped back, and Juliette busied herself with the bread, her cheeks warm despite the draft from the door. That night, after tucking Emma in, Juliette paused outside Vaughn's study. The door was ajar, and she could see him sitting at his desk, writing in what appeared to be a journal. She started to continue to her room, but hesitated when he looked up and saw her. Juliette, he said, setting down his pen. Is Emma asleep? She is. She wanted 3 stories tonight. He smiled fondly. She's making up for lost time, I think. Would you come in for a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Cautiously, Juliette entered the study. This time, instead of taking the chair across from his desk, Vaughn guided her to the small settee near the fireplace, sitting beside her with a respectful distance between them. Christmas is approaching, he began, and I wanted to ask, what are your plans for after the holidays? The question caught her off guard. My plans. When I hired you, we didn't discuss terms beyond your immediate needs and the ranches. But I've been thinking. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. The position here is permanent, if you want it. In fact, I hope very much that you'll stay. Relief flooded through her. She had been worrying about this very question, wondering if her employment might be temporary. Thank you, Vaughn. I would like to stay. He nodded, but his expression remained serious. There's something else. Something I need to tell you before anything else develops between us. Juliette's heart began to race. So she hadn't imagined the growing connection between them, the lingering looks, the charged moments. Yes. When my wife Caroline died, he said slowly, I was devastated. Not just by grief, but by guilt. Guilt, Juliette repeated, confused. Vaughn stood and moved to the fireplace, resting one hand on the mantel as he stared into the flames. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. The doctor and Helena warned us that it was risky, that Caroline's heart wasn't strong enough. He advised us to terminate the pregnancy. Juliette drew in a sharp breath. Such things were rarely spoken of openly, though she knew they happened. Caroline refused, Vaughn continued. She wanted the baby so badly. She said she'd rather die trying to bring our child into the world than live without having tried. His voice broke slightly. I should have insisted. I should have put her life first. Instead, I supported her choice, and I lost them both. The raw pain in his voice moved Juliette to rise and join him by the fire. Tentatively, she placed a hand on his arm. Vaughn, you honored her wishes. There's no guilt in that. He turned to face her, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. For months after, I couldn't forgive myself. Couldn't imagine ever feeling anything but grief and guilt again. And then you arrived, and suddenly, he shook his head, struggling for words. Suddenly, I found myself looking forward to each day, noticing the sunrise again, laughing with Emma, wanting to see your smile. Juliette's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. I understand, she said softly. After Thomas died, I thought that part of me was finished. The part that could feel joy, hope, attraction. And now, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Now I find myself thinking of the future again, she admitted. But Vaughn, I'm your employee. Emma is just beginning to heal. There are so many reasons why we should be cautious. I know, he agreed, taking her hands in his. I'm not asking for promises, Juliette. I'm just asking if you might be open to exploring what's growing between us. Slowly, respectfully, with Emma's well-being always foremost in our minds. Juliette looked down at their joined hands, his large and strong, hers smaller but equally capable. Hands that had known work and loss and were now, perhaps, reaching for something new together. Yes, she said simply, raising her eyes to meet his. I would like that. The relief and joy that crossed Vaughn's face made her heart swell. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, but instead, he brought her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Thank you, he whispered, for your honesty, for your care of Emma, for bringing light back into this house. As Juliette returned to her room that night, her hands still tingling from his touch, her mind whirled with possibilities she had never dared to consider. She had come to Valley B Ranch seeking employment, a roof over her head, a way to survive. She had never expected to find a second chance at happiness. Yet even as hope bloomed in her heart, a nagging worry remained. What would the neighbors think of Vaughn courting his cook? What would it mean for Emma if things didn't work out between them? And were they both truly ready to open their hearts again, or were they simply seeking comfort and shared grief? These questions lingered as Christmas approached, even as Juliette found herself drawn deeper into the life of the ranch and its small family. Each day brought new moments of connection. Vaughn's hand brushing hers as she passed him coffee at breakfast, Emma's increasing chatter as she helped in the kitchen, evening conversations by the fire after the child was asleep. They were building something fragile and precious, step by careful step. Neither of them mentioned love. That word seemed too weighty, too sacred to invoke just yet. But it hovered between them, unspoken but increasingly undeniable. Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and fresh snow. The ranch house had been transformed with greenery, candles, and Emma's paper snowflakes hanging from every available surface. In the kitchen, Juliette directed the preparations for the evening's feast, her cheeks flushed from the heat of the stove and the excitement of the day. As the first guests began to arrive, neighboring ranchers and their families, some having traveled hours by sleigh to attend, Juliette felt a momentary panic. Until now, her relationship with Vaughn had developed in the private world of the ranch. Tonight, they would be on display before the entire community. You look beautiful, came Vaughn's voice from the doorway. Juliette turned, smoothing the skirt of her best dress, a deep green wool that she had carefully pressed for the occasion. Thank you. I should check the turkeys once more before joining the guests. Vaughn stepped into the kitchen, closing the door behind him. The turkeys are perfect, like everything else you've prepared. Emma is already showing Mrs. Davidson her new dress and telling her all about how you made it for her. Juliette smiled, recalling the hours spent altering one of Caroline's old dresses to fit the child. She looks like an angel in it. Juliette, Vaughn said, his expression suddenly serious. Before everyone arrives, I wanted to give you something. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Merry Christmas. Surprised, Juliette accepted the gift. But I thought we were exchanging gifts tomorrow morning, with Emma. This one is just from me to you, he explained. Open it. Carefully, she unwrapped the package to reveal a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Oh, Vaughn, it's beautiful, she breathed, opening the locket to find it empty, waiting for memories yet to be made. I thought, perhaps someday it might hold a picture of Emma, he said quietly. And maybe one of me as well. The implication that he saw a future where she would want to carry their images close to her heart brought tears to Juliette's eyes. I would like that very much, she whispered. Would you help me put it on? Vaughn took the necklace and moved behind her. Juliette lifted her hair as he fastened the clasp, his fingers warm against the nape of her neck. When he finished, he didn't step away immediately, and Juliette felt his breath against her skin. I never expected to feel this way again, he said softly, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. To want a future with someone. Juliette turned to face him, their bodies close in the quiet kitchen. Nor did I, she admitted. It frightens me sometimes, how quickly you and Emma have become so important to me. Does it help to know I'm frightened too? His smile was tender as he reached up to touch the locket now resting against her collarbone. Worth it, though. A knock at the kitchen door broke the moment. "Mr. Barrington?" called Mrs. Finch. "The Thorntons have arrived, and they're asking for you." Vaughn sighed, stepping back reluctantly. "Duty calls. Will you join us in a few minutes?" Juliette nodded, her hand going to the locket. "I'll be there soon." The Christmas Eve gathering was everything a frontier celebration should be: warm, lively, and filled with the spirit of community that made life on the frontier not just bearable but joyful. The dining room and sitting room had been cleared to make space for the 30-some guests, with tables laden with Juliette's cooking along one wall and a small area cleared for dancing. As she moved among the guests, Juliette was welcomed with genuine warmth. These people knew loss and hardship. They understood the value of new beginnings. More than one older woman squeezed her hand and whispered approval of the changes they saw in both Vaughn and Emma. "That child hasn't smiled like that since before her mama passed," observed Mrs. Thompson, the foreman's wife. "And Vaughn? Well, I haven't seen that light in his eyes in a long while." "You're good for them both, Mrs. Keller." Later, when the fiddle player struck up a waltz, Vaughn found Juliette by the punch bowl. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked, extending his hand. Conscious of the eyes upon them, Juliette hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. As he led her to the center of the room, she was aware of the conversation's quieting, of the significance this public dance held in their small community. Vaughn's hand was warm at her waist as he guided her through the steps of the waltz. "Everyone is watching," she murmured, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "Let them," he replied softly. "I'm not ashamed of what I feel for you, Juliette." "And what is that?" she dared to ask, her heart pounding beneath the silver locket. He drew her slightly closer, still proper, but intimate enough to make his intentions clear to anyone watching. "Hope," he said simply. "A future. The chance to build something new without forgetting what came before." As they turned with the music, Juliette caught sight of Emma watching them from beside the Christmas tree, her small face alight with something that looked like happiness. In that moment, surrounded by evergreen and candlelight, with Vaughn's steady presence guiding her through the dance, Juliette allowed herself to believe that perhaps this Christmas marked not just the end of a difficult year, but the beginning of something beautiful. The evening continued with more dancing, the sharing of traditional Christmas stories, and finally, carols around the piano Mrs. Thompson had insisted on bringing to the territory despite her husband's protests about transporting such an item over mountain passes. As midnight approached, Emma, fighting sleep but determined to stay awake until Christmas officially arrived, climbed into Juliette's lap where she sat near the fire. Without thinking, Juliette wrapped her arms around the child, resting her cheek against Emma's soft blonde hair. "Are you excited for Christmas morning?" she asked softly. Emma nodded, her eyes heavy. "Will you be there when I wake up? To see what Santa brought?" "Of course I will," Juliette promised. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." "Good," Emma murmured, nestling closer. "Because I asked Santa for you to stay with us forever." Juliette's heart caught in her throat as she looked up to find Vaughn watching them, having overheard his daughter's sleepy confession. The love in his eyes, for there was no denying it was love now, made everything else in the room fade away. As the last guests departed and the house grew quiet, Vaughn carried a sleeping Emma upstairs to bed. Juliette followed, helping to remove the child's shoes and tuck her beneath the quilt without waking her. Together, they placed the gifts from Santa beneath the small tree in the corner of Emma's room, moving with the synchronized care of parents who had been doing this together for years rather than for the first time. In the hallway outside Emma's room, Vaughn took Juliette's hand. "Thank you for making this Christmas so special for her. For us. It's been special for me too," she replied softly. He hesitated, then said, "There's something I need to ask you, Juliette. Something I've been thinking about for weeks now." Her pulse quickened. "Yes. I know it's soon. I know there are those who would say we should wait longer, that we're both still healing from our losses. And perhaps they're right." He drew a deep breath. "But I also know that life on the frontier teaches us not to waste precious time. And what I feel for you, it's not something I want to waste a single day of." "Vaughn," Juliette whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, he continued, his voice low and earnest. But I want you to know that I'm falling in love with you, Juliette Keller. And when you're ready, if you're ready, I want to ask you to be my wife, to be Emma's mother, to build a life with us here. Tears filled Juliette's eyes as emotion overwhelmed her. Joy, fear, hope, uncertainty, all of it swirled together in her heart. Oh, Vaughn, she managed. I'm falling in love with you too. With both of you. His smile was radiant as he drew her gently into his arms. Then we have time. Time to be certain. Time to let Emma adjust. Time to honor what came before while embracing what lies ahead. As his lips met hers in a kiss that was both tender and filled with promise, Juliette knew that she had found her answer to grief, not in forgetting, but in finding the courage to love again. Thomas would always be a part of her past, just as Caroline would always be a part of Vaughn's and Emma's. But the future was something they could build together. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. Juliette woke early, her heart light with possibilities. As she kindled the kitchen fire and began preparing a special Christmas breakfast, she heard Emma's excited footsteps on the stairs. Mrs. Keller, Mrs. Keller, Santa came, the child cried, bursting into the kitchen. Did he now? Juliette laughed, kneeling down to accept Emma's enthusiastic hug. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Merry Christmas, came Vaughn's deeper voice from the doorway. He stood watching them, still in his dressing gown, his hair tousled from sleep, his expression one of perfect contentment. I think we have a very excited young lady who would like to open her presents. Breakfast can wait, Juliette agreed, rising to her feet. Christmas morning comes but once a year, after all. In the sitting room, they gathered around the tree. Emma on the floor amid the packages, Vaughn and Juliette side by side on the settee, their hands clasped between them. As Emma exclaimed over each gift, the doll Vaughn had ordered from Helena, the illustrated book of fairy tales from Juliette, the candy and small toys that Santa had brought, Juliette felt a sense of belonging she had thought lost forever. When the packages had all been opened and Emma was contentedly playing with her new treasures, Vaughn squeezed Juliette's hand. I believe there's one more gift, he said, reaching behind a cushion to produce a small box wrapped in red paper. Emma looked up, interested. Another present? Who's it for? It's for Juliette, Vaughn said, placing the box in her hands. From both of us. With trembling fingers, Juliette unwrapped the package and opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small, perfect diamond. Her breath caught as she looked up at Vaughn in question. I know I said we had time, he said softly, but I couldn't resist. It doesn't have to be now, or even soon. But whenever you're ready, the ring, and the question that goes with it, will be waiting. Emma scrambled to her feet, peering at the ring with wide eyes. Is that a wedding ring? Are you going to marry Papa? Juliette looked from the child's hopeful face to Vaughn's loving one. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that the answer would be yes. Whether today or a month from now, her heart had already decided. Would you like it if I did? She asked Emma gently. The little girl nodded vigorously. More than anything. Then you could tuck me in every night, and we could bake cookies whenever we want, and you would be my new mama, and Papa wouldn't be sad anymore, and slow down, sweetheart. Vaughn laughed, lifting Emma onto his lap. Let's give Juliette a chance to think about it. It's a big decision. But Juliette was already slipping the ring onto her finger, finding that it fit perfectly. I don't need to think about it, she said softly. I know what my heart wants. What it's wanted since that first night when Emma asked me to tuck her in. And what does your heart want? Vaughn asked, his voice husky with emotion. This, Juliette said simply, gesturing to the three of them. Us. A family. Emma's squeal of delight was followed by Vaughn's more restrained but equally joyful response as he leaned forward to kiss Juliette tenderly. Their future sealed in that moment of perfect Christmas morning clarity. Spring came early to the valley that year, as if nature itself was celebrating new beginnings. The wedding was held on the first truly warm day in April, with the mountains still capped in snow but wildflowers beginning to dip the meadows. Every rancher and homesteader within 50 miles attended, the community gathering to witness the union of two people who had found love after loss. Juliette wore a simple gown of ivory silk, with wildflowers in her hair and the silver locket containing pictures of Vaughn and Emma around her neck. Emma, as flower girl, practically danced down the aisle, scattering petals with abandon and beaming at the guests. When it came time for the vows, Vaughn added a special promise to his daughter, kneeling down to her level. Emma, I promise that Juliette and I will always love you and protect you, and that the three of us will be a family from this day forward. Juliette then knelt as well, taking Emma's small hands in hers. And I promise to love you as my own daughter, to honor the memory of your mothers who came before me, and to be the best mother I can be for all the days to come. There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering as Emma threw her arms around both of them, the new family embracing before the assembled witnesses. At the reception, held on the ranch with tables set up under the budding cottonwood trees, Mrs. Thompson approached the newly married couple. When you hired that young widow to cook for you, Vaughn Barrington, did you have any idea it would lead to this? Vaughn smiled, his arm around Juliette's waist. Not in my wildest dreams. But I thank God every day that it did. And what about you, Mrs. Barrington? The older woman asked with a knowing smile. Did you expect to find a husband and daughter when you answered that advertisement? Juliette looked across the yard to where Emma was twirling in her new dress, showing off to the other children. I came looking for work, she said softly, but I found a home instead. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and Emma had finally been persuaded to go to bed, Vaughn led Juliette onto the porch. The stars were emerging in the vast Montana sky, the air cool but promise-filled. Happy? He asked, drawing her into his arms. More than I ever thought possible, Juliette replied, resting her head against his chest. When Thomas died, I thought my chance at happiness died with him. I never imagined I would find love again, especially not like this. Like what? Vaughn asked, his lips against her hair. Complete, she said simply. A love that includes not just us, but Emma. A family born from loss, but stronger for having weathered it. Vaughn nodded, understanding perfectly. Caroline once told me that love isn't diminished by being shared, that the heart expands to make room for more. He tilted Juliette's face up to his. She was right. Loving you doesn't lessen what I felt for her, it honors it. And my love for Thomas makes me treasure what we have all the more, Juliette agreed. Because I know how precious and fleeting life can be. As Vaughn's lips met hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, Juliette silently thanked whatever fate had led her to answer that advertisement for a cook at the Valley B Ranch. She had come seeking employment, but found purpose. She had come seeking shelter, but found belonging. She had come as a young widow asked to cook for a rich rancher, never expecting that his daughter's simple request, "Can she tuck me in too?" would lead to a love that would heal them all.